They treated me like the black sheep until I inherited the empire. My name is Emily Campbell. For as long as I could remember, I had been the black sheep of the Campbell family. In a family where confidence was loud and ambition was displayed like a trophy, I was the quiet one who never seemed to fit the image they had in mind. At every holiday dinner, every birthday celebration, and every so-called family strategy meeting, I found myself sitting quietly at the far end of the long dining table, listening while everyone else talked about the company as if I weren't even there. The Campbell family owned one of the largest logistics businesses in the region. Our trucks filled the highways, our warehouses stretched across several cities, and our name appeared on shipping contracts everywhere. For my relatives, the company wasn't just a business, it was the center of their identity. Conversations around the table were always about expansion plans, new distribution routes, market dominance, and who among the younger generation would one day take control of the empire. But according to my relatives, I didn't belong in that world. To them, I was the quiet cousin who never fought for attention, the one who didn't brag about promotions or argue loudly about strategy, the one who didn't try to impress my grandfather with big promises. Over time, they turned that quietness into a label, the black sheep. My cousins were always praised as the future of the company, Lucas Campbell especially. Lucas had a way of speaking that filled every room. At family dinners, he would lean back in his chair and describe the day he would modernize the company, as if the position of leader had already been reserved for him. The adults nodded proudly while he spoke, and then, almost like a habit, Lucas would glance toward me. "Not everyone is built for business," he would say with a small laugh. Sometimes my relatives joined in. "Emily prefers simpler things," one aunt once said. Another time someone joked that I would probably end up managing a small office somewhere far away from the real action. The laughter always followed. I usually kept my eyes on my plate, pretending the comments didn't bother me. It was easier that way. Responding would only turn their jokes into arguments, and arguments were something the Campbell family enjoyed far too much. What none of them realized was that while they were busy talking, I was always listening. And while they believed I didn't understand the empire they loved to discuss, I had already begun to see things about it that they never noticed. "Emily prefers quiet little jobs," he once joked at dinner. "Business is too serious for her." Everyone laughed. I forced a smile and stayed silent. They never bothered asking what I actually studied in college. They never cared that my degree was in business analytics. To them, I was simply the quiet one who didn't compete for attention. But my grandfather, Charles Campbell, was different. He often watched those dinners silently, his sharp eyes moving from one person to another. Sometimes, after everyone left the table, he would call me into his study, and those conversations would quietly change the direction of my life. Grandfather's study was my favorite place in the entire house. It smelled of old books and strong coffee. Tall windows looked out across the gardens, and the walls were filled with framed photos from the early days of the company. Every time I entered, he would gesture toward the chair across from his desk. "Tell me something interesting," he would say. At first, I thought he was joking, but he was serious. He asked questions no one else in the family cared about. "How would you improve our shipping routes? What do you think about the new warehouse expansion? What mistakes do you see in our reports?" The first time he showed me company documents, I was shocked. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Grandfather smiled slightly. "Because you actually read the numbers." Our conversations became regular, while the rest of the family competed for his attention during dinners and meetings. I spoke with him quietly in that study. They thought I was simply keeping the old man company. They had no idea what we were really discussing. Family gatherings always felt the same. Loud conversations, bragging, subtle competition. My cousins constantly tried to impress grandfather. Lucas was the worst. He liked to speak loudly about his plans for the company, even though he had only worked there for 2 years. "At this rate, I'll probably be running operations soon," he said during one dinner. My aunt nodded proudly. "That's the leadership we need." Lucas glanced at me with a smirk. Of course, some people prefer quieter lives. Everyone understood what he meant. I looked down at my plate. Grandfather remained silent. Later that night, he called me into his study again. "Tell me," he said calmly, "what do you think about Lucas's expansion plan?" I hesitated. "It's risky," I said finally. Grandfather leaned forward. "Explain." So I did. I pointed out the financial risks and weak projections. He listened carefully. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Interesting," he said. Then he smiled. "You notice things others ignore." Over the next few years, my quiet meetings with Grandfather continued. He shared more information with me than anyone realized. Financial reports, expansion plans, market changes. Sometimes he simply asked for my opinion. Other times he tested my ideas with difficult questions. Meanwhile, the rest of the family remained focused on one thing: the future inheritance. Everyone assumed Grandfather would divide the company among the most ambitious relatives. Lucas acted like the decision was already made. At one dinner, he raised a glass and said loudly, "To the future of Campbell Logistics." Everyone cheered. Grandfather watched quietly. Later that night, he spoke to me again. "Do you know why I built this company?" he asked. "To create something lasting," I replied. He nodded. "Exactly." Then he looked directly at me. "But an empire only survives if the right person protects it." His words stayed in my mind long after I left the study. Despite my degree, I never worked directly for the family company. Lucas made sure of that. Whenever job positions opened, he quietly influenced the hiring decisions. "She wouldn't fit the culture," he told people, "so I built my own career instead." I worked for a logistics consulting firm across the city. The work was challenging, and I loved it. But my family rarely asked about it. To them, if I wasn't working for Campbell Logistics, I wasn't important. Grandfather, however, followed everything. Every few weeks, he asked about my projects. "What problems are you solving?" he would ask. I explained my work with shipping data and route optimization. He listened with great interest. "You're gaining experience they don't realize you have," he said once. I didn't fully understand his meaning at the time, but I would soon. One winter evening, I received a call from the family house. Grandfather had been taken to the hospital. The news hit me like a wave. When I arrived, several family members were already there. Lucas stood near the door talking loudly on his phone. "He'll recover," he told someone confidently. But when I saw Grandfather, I knew the truth. He looked tired, older than I had ever seen him. He smiled when he noticed me. "Emily," he said softly. I sat beside him. "You should rest," I said. But he shook his head. "There's something you need to remember." I leaned closer. "Never chase power," he whispered. "Protect what matters." Those were the last clear words he spoke to me. A week later, Charles Campbell passed away. The days after his passing were filled with quiet tension. Family members moved through the house like nervous actors, waiting for the final scene of a play. Everyone knew what was coming. The will reading. Lucas acted especially confident. "I've spent years preparing for leadership," he said one evening. No one disagreed. They spoke openly about future positions in the company. Who would control operations? Who would manage finances? No one mentioned me. I didn't expect them to. After all, I was the black sheep. The one who stayed quiet. The one who never competed for attention. But as the day of the will reading approached, I remembered something Grandfather once told me. You notice things others ignore. At the time, I thought he meant business strategy. I would soon realize he meant something much bigger. The lawyer's office was silent when we arrived for the will reading. Every member of the Campbell family filled the long conference table. Lucas sat confidently near the front. I chose a seat near the end. The lawyer, Jonathan Price, adjusted his glasses and opened the thick envelope on the table. "This document contains the final wishes of Charles Campbell," he began. Everyone leaned forward. He read several smaller gifts first. Charity donations, personal items. Then he reached the final section. The room grew quiet. "This portion concerns the controlling shares of Campbell Logistics." Lucas smiled slightly. Jonathan paused before continuing. "After careful consideration, Charles Campbell has chosen to transfer the controlling ownership of the company to one individual." My heart beat faster. The lawyer looked down at the document. Then he spoke the name, Emily Campbell. For a moment, no one moved. Then the entire room erupted in shocked voices. Because the black sheep of the family had just inherited the empire, for a few seconds after the lawyer spoke my name, the room stayed completely silent. Then everything exploded at once. "That's impossible," Lucas said loudly. Several relatives began talking at the same time. Chairs moved, papers rustled. Shocked faces turned toward me like I had suddenly become someone else. I sat frozen in my seat. Jonathan Price raised his hand calmly. "Please allow me to finish." The room slowly quieted. He continued reading the document. "Charles Campbell has transferred 60% of the company's controlling shares to Emily Campbell. This decision grants her full executive authority over Campbell Logistics." Lucas slammed his hand on the table. "This makes no sense," he said. "I've worked there for years." Jonathan looked at him calmly. "Your grandfather's decision was very clear." I still hadn't spoken. The weight of the moment felt unreal. All those quiet conversations in grandfather's study suddenly returned to my mind. The questions, the advice, the tests. He had been preparing me the entire time. And now, the entire family was staring at the one person they had always ignored. The meeting ended in chaos. Some relatives whispered angrily to each other. Others avoided looking at me entirely. Lucas walked straight toward me. "You must have manipulated him," he said quietly. I met his eyes calmly. "I didn't." He scoffed. "You expect me to believe that?" Before I could answer, Jonathan stepped between us. "The will is legally binding," he said firmly. Lucas clenched his jaw. "This isn't over." He stormed out of the room. The rest of the family slowly followed. Within minutes, I was the only one left sitting at the long table. Jonathan closed the folder and looked at me. "Your grandfather trusted you," he said. "I didn't expect this." He nodded. "Most people didn't." I looked down at the documents again. Ownership papers, legal authority, responsibility for thousands of employees. The empire my family had fought over now rested in my hands. And suddenly, the quiet black sheep of the Campbell family had become the most powerful person in the room. The next morning, my phone would not stop ringing. Family members called one after another. Some tried to sound supportive. Others sounded furious. My aunt demanded a family meeting. Lucas sent a short message. "You're making a huge mistake." But I ignored the calls. Instead, I drove to Campbell Logistics headquarters for the first time as the majority owner. The building looked exactly as it always had. Tall glass walls. Busy employees moving through the lobby. But this time, everything felt different. Jonathan met me at the entrance. "The board is waiting upstairs," he said. I nodded and followed him to the elevator. Inside the conference room, several executives sat around a long table. They all stood when I entered. For a moment, the room felt very similar to the lawyer's office. Silent, careful, curious. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I would like to introduce the new controlling owner of Campbell Logistics." And suddenly, every eye in the room turned toward the black sheep who now owned the empire. The board meeting felt surprisingly calm. Most executives spoke politely and professionally. They asked about my plans for the company. For the first time in years, my knowledge of the business finally had a place. We discussed shipping routes, warehouse expansions, and market trends. Several executives seemed impressed by my ideas. But not everyone looked comfortable, especially Lucas. He had arrived late and sat near the end of the table, watching me carefully. When the meeting ended, he approached me again. "You think you understand this business?" he said. "I've been studying it for years," I replied. Lucas laughed. "You've never even worked here." "That's true, but I understand the numbers." His smile disappeared slightly. "Numbers don't run companies." "No," I said calmly, "but bad numbers can destroy them." For the first time, Lucas looked unsure, and I realized something important. The family may have treated me like the black sheep, but in this room, knowledge mattered more than family opinions. Over the next few weeks, I spent every day learning the full structure of the company: departments, employees, contracts, financial records. The deeper I looked, the more problems I discovered. Several projects were losing money. Some managers had approved risky investments, and many of those decisions traced back to Lucas. One afternoon, I called him into my office. He walked in with his usual confidence. "You wanted to see me?" "Yes." I placed a financial report on the desk. "These expansion contracts are unstable." Lucas glanced at the papers. "They'll recover." "Maybe," I said, "but the current losses are significant." Lucas crossed his arms. "You're overreacting." I leaned back in my chair. "I'm protecting the company." He stared at me for a moment. "You really think you're in charge now?" I met his gaze calmly. "I am." Word about the leadership change spread quickly throughout the company. Some employees seemed excited. Others were cautious. After all, I was the quiet family member no one expected to see running the business. But results speak louder than opinions. Within 2 months, we had already corrected several expensive mistakes. Shipping routes improved. Warehouse costs dropped. Profits slowly began rising again. One afternoon, an older manager stopped by my office. "I worked with your grandfather for 30 years, he said. "I know." He smiled slightly. "You remind me of him." I felt a small sense of relief hearing that, but not everyone was happy. Lucas had grown increasingly frustrated. He argued during meetings, questioned my decisions, and tried to convince other relatives that I didn't belong in charge. But every week the company performed better. And slowly, even the loudest critics started running out of arguments. 3 months after the will reading, the family finally held another gathering. The atmosphere felt completely different from previous dinners. People spoke more carefully. Lucas sat quietly across the table. At one point, my aunt cleared her throat. "We should talk about the future of the company," she said. I nodded. "We are." Lucas leaned forward. "You mean you are?" I stayed calm. "I'm responsible for protecting the business." He shook his head. "Grandfather made a mistake." The room became quiet. For years, Lucas had spoken with complete confidence. Now, his voice carried frustration. I simply replied, "Grandfather made his decision very carefully." Lucas didn't respond, but the tension in the room made one thing clear. The black sheep of the family was no longer someone they could ignore. The weeks after the family dinner grew tense in ways I had not expected. Lucas stopped pretending to cooperate. During meetings, he questioned every decision I made. Even when the board supported me, he spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear his doubts. One morning, Jonathan Price called me earlier than usual. "There's something you should know," he said carefully. "What is it?" "Lucas has been speaking with several minority shareholders." I frowned. "What exactly is he telling them?" "That you're inexperienced," Jonathan replied, "and that the company would be safer under someone who has worked there longer." I leaned back in my chair. That sounded exactly like Lucas. "Can he actually challenge my leadership?" I asked. Jonathan paused before answering. "Technically, anyone can attempt it, but your grandfather structured the shares carefully. Your control cannot be removed easily." A small sense of relief passed through me. Grandfather really had thought of everything. Still, something about the situation felt unfinished. Lucas had always been competitive, and people like him rarely accept losing quietly. A few days later, Lucas asked to meet privately. He entered my office with his usual confident stride, but there was tension in his face. "You know this situation isn't stable," he said. "What situation?" I asked calmly. "You running the company." I folded my hands on the desk. "Why not?" Lucas walked slowly around the office. "Because you've never been part of the real business world here." "That's not true," I replied. He laughed quietly. "You sat quietly at dinners while the rest of us worked." "Yes," I said. "And while you were talking, I was learning." Lucas stopped walking. "What does that mean?" "It means grandfather showed me the reports years ago." For the first time, Lucas looked surprised. "He did what?" I nodded. "He wanted my opinion on strategy." Lucas stared at me for a long moment. "So while we were fighting for his approval, he was already preparing you." "That's right," I said. And suddenly, the entire story made sense to him. The company itself was improving faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months, profits had increased dramatically. Shipping routes were optimized. Several risky contracts were canceled before they caused serious damage. But success brought its own problems. One afternoon, Jonathan walked into my office carrying a file. "You should see this," he said. Inside were several emails. Lucas had been quietly negotiating with a competing logistics firm. "What is he planning?" I asked. "Possibly starting his own company," Jonathan said. That did not surprise me. Lucas had always wanted power more than anything else. Still, the situation worried me. A competitor started by someone who knew our internal operations could be dangerous. Jonathan watched my expression carefully. "You're not worried about losing?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, but I do want to understand his next move. Because if Lucas had learned anything from our family, it was that ambition without strategy could destroy everything." A week later, something unexpected happened. One of Lucas's closest allies inside the company requested a meeting with me. His name was Martin, a senior operations manager. "I think you should know something," he said quietly. "What is it?" "Lucas is planning to convince investors that you're weakening the company." I frowned. "But our numbers are stronger than ever." Martin nodded. "I know that. Most people here know that." "Then why tell me?" He hesitated. "Because when your grandfather ran this company, he trusted people who protected it." I understood what he meant. Loyalty to the company mattered more than loyalty to family. And for the first time, I realized Lucas had miscalculated something important. Employees respected results more than family politics. The real confrontation arrived during the annual shareholder meeting. Every major investor gathered inside the main conference hall. Lucas sat near the front row, watching me carefully. The board chairman began by presenting financial results. When the numbers appeared on the screen, quiet murmurs spread through the room. Profits had increased by nearly 30%. Expansion costs had dropped. Long-term contracts had stabilized. Everything was moving in the right direction. Then it was my turn to speak. I walked to the front of the room and looked at the audience. Many investors had known my grandfather personally. They studied me carefully. Our success this year comes from discipline, I said, not risk. When I finished, the room filled with applause. Lucas did not clap, but I could see the moment his confidence finally cracked, because the numbers had proven something he could no longer deny. The black sheep was protecting the empire. After the meeting ended, Lucas followed me into the hallway. "You planned this," he said. "What do you mean?" "You made the company successful so no one would question your leadership." I shook my head. "I made the company successful because that's my job." Lucas leaned against the wall. "I always believed I deserved this place." "Why?" I asked quietly. "Because I worked for it." I considered his words. "Working hard isn't the same as understanding responsibility." Lucas sighed. "Grandfather always trusted you more than he trusted me." I did not answer, because deep down, Lucas already knew the truth. Grandfather had never been impressed by ambition alone. He valued patience, observation, and long-term thinking. Months passed, and the tension between us slowly faded. Lucas eventually resigned from his position. He announced plans to start a new logistics company of his own. The news spread quickly through the industry. Some people predicted a rivalry. Others expected him to fail. When we spoke one final time before he left, Lucas seemed calmer. "You've done well," he admitted. "Thank you." He looked down briefly. "I always thought I needed to prove I was the strongest leader." "And now?" Lucas shrugged. "Maybe leadership isn't about strength." I nodded slowly. "Sometimes it's about protecting what already exists." He smiled slightly. "I think grandfather knew that." A year later, Campbell Logistics had become stronger than ever. New international contracts expanded our reach. Technology upgrades, improved efficiency. Employees felt more secure about the company's future. One evening I returned to the old family house. Grandfather's study still looked exactly the same. The same desk, the same photographs. I sat in the chair where we once spoke. For a moment I imagined him sitting across from me again. "So," he might say, "tell me something interesting." I smiled quietly. "The empire is safe," I whispered. And for the first time since his passing, the responsibility felt lighter. At the next family gathering, something unexpected happened. No one treated me like the black sheep anymore. Conversations changed. Relatives asked about the company. They listened when I spoke. Even the older family members who once ignored me seemed proud. Lucas attended briefly as well. Our conversation was simple. "No hard feelings," he said. "None," I replied. The tension that once defined our family had finally disappeared. Not because someone had won, but because everyone had finally accepted the truth. Leadership is proven through action, not expectation. Looking back now, the story feels almost unbelievable. For years my family believed I was the weakest member among them, the quiet one, the outsider. But grandfather saw something they didn't. He saw patience. He saw someone willing to listen before speaking. Someone who understood that power without responsibility could destroy everything. And in the end, the empire survived because the person they ignored had been learning the entire time. The black sheep they dismissed had quietly become the one person capable of protecting what mattered most. Not through revenge, not through pride, but through the quiet strength they had overlooked all along. Sometimes the people who speak the least are the ones who see the most. For years, Emily Campbell was treated like the black sheep of her family. While others chased power, recognition, and control, she quietly observed, learned, and understood the true heart of the empire her grandfather built. The very qualities her family dismissed, patience, humility, and careful thinking, were the same qualities that made her the only person capable of protecting what truly mattered. This story reminds us that leadership is not always loud, and strength does not always appear in the form people expect. Real power often grows in silence, in moments of learning, reflection, and quiet determination. In the end, the Campbell Empire was not inherited by the person who demanded it the most, but by the one who respected it the most. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks turns out to be the one who was meant to lead all along.